When it comes to edge rushers in the 2017 NFL draft, I'm talking about, for that classification, the guys that would primarily play as 3-4 outside linebackers. Maybe some as Sam, so we're Leos in a 4-3, but primarily 3-4 outside linebackers. And I think when it comes to grading this class, you'll have some people that have Tim Williams #1 on their board because fuck the off the field shit. They're looking at the guy with that special type of explosive first step quickness and his ability to bend the edge. Some people might look at Charles Harris, and I don't get it, but maybe they'll look at the pedigree of some of the recent pass rushers come out of Missouri and envision him being able to step into the NFL and do some similar things. Maybe some people will look at a guy like a Derek Barnett if they think he's a 3-4 outside linebacker and might envision him being the #1 guy. Some might look at a TJ Watt, so on and so forth. But for me, the #1 edge rusher in this draft is Ryan Anderson from Alabama. He's one of my favorite football players in this draft. I feel like he's one of the more well-rounded football players at his position for what he does, regardless of position, in the entire draft class. I think it's interesting when you look at a program like Alabama and you look at all the defensive talent that's there, first-round talent arguably at all three levels of the defense. And especially when you talk about a linebacking core at Alabama that feature guys like Reuben Foster and Tim Williams. There's Ryan Anderson. But then you've got Jonathan Allen up front. You've got a guy who will be a mid-round pick that could surprise some people in Dalvin Tomlinson. You got guys in the secondary like Marlon Humphrey and the other corner who you'll hear about in the 2018 draft. Fitzpatrick is his name, I think it is. Either way, we'll learn more about him next year. But sometimes it begs the question of, is a guy a product of the talent in the system that he plays in? But you can also look at guys and you say it's really interesting. You got Tim Williams, and he's going to stand out for a lot of people because of his explosiveness off the edge, because of what is projected to be his sheer athleticism. And a lot of people are going to prefer that because, like I said, sometimes that's the sexiest way to get to the quarterback. Sometimes it could be the path of least resistance to get to the quarterback too. And sometimes you just can't coach that. Some guys just have that. But these guys can also rely on that speed, quickness, athleticism, and not be as well-rounded of a football player, and they could have deficiencies in other areas. When I look at Ryan Anderson, though, he's one of those guys that, to me, you look at and you say he's a jack of all trades, master of none. He's just a really, really solid football player that, to me, can do so many good things. And he's a guy, more so than a Tim Williams, that you can leave on the field in all types of situations, all types of downs and distances, ask him to do anything you need him to do. I just think his defensive fit is better. He can play in 3-4. He can play in 4-3 as a Sam backer, 3-4 as an outside linebacker. He can just do so many things well. And as much as we talk about, let's say, a Tim Williams coming off of the edge, I will say about Ryan Anderson is that there were a lot of times on film you would see Ryan Anderson get to the quarterback at the same time or just one small half step behind Tim Williams, who only had one path to get to the quarterback. Ryan Anderson could potentially get there in several different ways. He did show some ability to bend the edge. Not ever going to be a super explosive athlete, but he's got some pass rush moves, and I think he's got a more expansive repertoire than Tim Williams, even though he could still use some work there. His snap anticipation and his hustle and effort level, I think, create some sack opportunities that other guys just wouldn't find. But the big difference between a Ryan Anderson and a lot of other edge rushers in this draft is the fact that not only can he rush the quarterback at a decent level, he's also outstanding against the run. He's not quite to the level of TJ Watt against the run, but he's in the upper echelon, the top tier in terms of edge rushers playing the run in this draft. Now, as I've referenced before, in the interest of fairness, how highly do you want to take an edge rusher if you're pumping up smoke about his run defense? Because that's ultimately not what you're drafting him for. But when I've got a guy like Ryan Anderson who's shown some ability to get to the quarterback and make some plays in the backfield, and then on top of that, I can rely on him in all types of situations to be an effective run defender. That means something. He also showed me upside in coverage, too. He's got great awareness and feel for playing in zone. He'll need some work on his technique and man coverage, but again, how much are you going to utilize him in that role? But especially in zone, I think he could definitely hold his own. I think he's much better at getting off of blocks than maybe he's getting credit for. I think sometimes his effort level alone, his will, his hustle is what helps him beat blockers. His lack of length, you wish he was a little longer. I will say that. If you look at Ryan Anderson, you looked at all the things he could do on the football field. If he was a little bit longer and he was a little bit quicker, you'd be talking about him being a top 10 talent in this draft. And it's just that simple. because I've tweeted about this before, and I'm sure a lot of other people say it too. It's not anything new, but Tim Williams is the more dynamic edge rusher, and Ryan Anderson is the far more complete, well-rounded, just flat-out better football player, and he really is. I mean, he was impressive. His instincts and awareness on the field, I thought, were outstanding and top-notch. His effort and motor were very, very good. What I like about him, too, you're talking about, again, similar to a Tim Williams, guys that played in the 3-4 in college, it's going to be a natural transition to a certain degree in terms of positional responsibilities at the NFL level. What I also loved about Ryan Anderson is he wasn't just a guy that made some plays, he was a guy that made some big-time, splashy, impact, momentum-changing plays, and in particular, some clutch plays at some key times. He played with a lot of talent at Alabama. He played in a lot of big games, but he was a guy that on a field full of men, I always felt like watching the film, he ultimately was one of the alpha dogs. After Jonathan Allen and maybe after Marlon Humphrey and maybe not sometimes, Ryan Anderson was the guy who my eyes gravitated to the most on the field for Alabama on that defensive side of the ball. Just tremendous. Now, the one thing that concerns me a little bit is he did have an off-the-field arrest for a domestic incident. How serious that is, I don't really know. It's something that you wish wasn't there. But he was a guy consistently at Alabama, was able to answer the bell the past 3 seasons, played in 42 games over the past 3 years. So he's played a lot of football, which again, sometimes is a concern for Alabama guys because they play a lot of football, a lot of big games. So are they beat up? Their bodies get worn down. But I'll tell you this much, this guy can really, really play. And you'll see that reflecting in my draft grade. He is my #1 graded 3-4 edge rusher in this draft. I've given him a grade of 91.0. I think Ryan Anderson is a first-round talent. Now, in no way, shape, or form do I think Ryan Anderson is going to get drafted in round #1. Frankly, I don't even think he's going to get drafted in round #2. I think this could be one of these situations where it's all about in the eye of the beholder. And based off of some of the things I look for at that position, I just gravitate to a guy like Ryan Anderson because while he's not the most spectacular player, he sure makes his fair share of spectacular plays. But more so, I feel like he's a guy you can count on, you can depend on, and he'll just do all types of different things in all types of different ways. He's a football player. And I know it sounds retarded sometimes to talk about, well, of course he's a football player. He's going to the NFL. No. Sometimes you just get guys that play in the NFL, athletes in the NFL. This guy is a true blue football player. And I would have loved nothing more than to see a guy like Ryan Anderson end up with a team, and maybe it still happens, like the New England Patriots. So I can only imagine what a Bill Belichick could get out of a guy like Ryan Anderson. It would be scary. I'd love to see what a Pittsburgh Steelers could get out of a Ryan Anderson. A Kansas City could get out of a guy like Ryan Anderson. Some of these teams that really know what they're doing in terms of linebackers at the NFL level. I think Ryan Anderson's a stud, and I think he's one of the more criminally underrated prospects in this year's draft.